He was such a hilarious kid. He loved to play jokes.
And I just heard gunshots.
But when that ride takes you on a road of no return, you may be asking yourself if the price was really worth it.
3 shots through a car window at a red light in Baton Rouge. Jordan Key, 18 years old, hit in the head, killed instantly. His friend Andre wounded, trying to understand what just happened. A security guard in a nearby parking lot memorizing a license plate in the dark. This is where it ended. But to understand how an aspiring artist with dreams of music production died over rap lyrics, over stolen words and crew rivalries, you have to go back. Because this wasn't random. It was planned. Coordinated. Someone had been tracking Jordan's movements that night, calling out his location, making sure the shooter knew exactly where to find him. The investigation would uncover something even more disturbing. When prosecutors offered a deal, a way out, a lighter sentence in exchange for testimony, one person refused, chose decades in prison over betraying the killer. Ride or die. Sometimes the dying is real, and sometimes the prison is forever. But let's start at the beginning, before the violence, when Jordan's voice still promised something bigger. Welcome. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment below. Is it morning, afternoon, or late night where you are? Your presence here truly matters. A quick note, this story includes certain dramatized elements for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to specific details is handled with respect. The message is what matters most. Jordan Key's voice cut through the warm Baton Rouge afternoon like it belonged somewhere bigger. He was 18 years old. A boy who could draw, dance, and make anyone laugh. The kind of kid everyone liked. His hands moved when he talked, sketching the air. His smile was easy. He had the face of someone who hadn't yet learned that the world could be cruel for no reason at all. His mother had always wanted him in the church choir. He had the talent, he had the gift, and he had the voice.
I always wanted him to sing in the church choir because he had the talent, he had the gift, and he had the voice.
She'd imagined him Sunday mornings in a robe, filling the sanctuary with hymns. But the voice that came out now was threaded through beats and bass lines, spilling into rap lyrics he wrote himself. It wasn't what she'd pictured. Still, she heard the same gift in it, the same command, the same presence. Jordan's grandmother remembered him as a very loving child, hilarious, full of joy. He was the boy who played jokes, who made people smile without trying. That hadn't changed. Even now, planning his future, he carried that lightness with him. They were planning community college together, Jordan and his mother. Music, yes, but a degree too. Something solid to build on. She wanted both for him, and he wanted them too. He was working on a record, a project with his crew. The kind of thing 18-year-olds dream about. The kind of thing that feels possible when you're standing at the beginning. His mother had questions. The rap scene in Baton Rouge wasn't gentle. There were beefs. Feuds over nothing stolen lyrics, disrespect, territory that didn't belong to anyone, young men talking tough online, making threats that sometimes stopped being talk. She saw it. She didn't like it. But Jordan was 18, and happy, and talented. There was time to steer him back if it went too far. She let it go, the choir voice, the hymns, because there was time. That's the assumption parents make, that tomorrow will arrive the same way today did, with the same voices in the same rooms, that there will be chances to course correct, to have the hard conversation later instead of now. Most of the time, that assumption holds. Sometimes it doesn't. Jordan Key was drawing his future in broad strokes that spring. Music and math, laughter and ambition, A record that hadn't been released yet, but would be soon. His voice filling rooms. His hands sketching plans. His mother watching and hoping and believing there was time. In another part of the same city, a girl who was very good at math was learning to live two lives at once. One of them would end his. The girl's name was Essence Dyson. She stood in the convenience store parking lot at 2 in the morning, phone in hand. Living the life her professors would never see. 19 years old. An LSU math major from a good family, smart enough to work for NASA, friends would say later. But on this June night in Baton Rouge, she wasn't thinking about calculus or career prospects. She was thinking about Chadley Chesterfield. Chad. 17. Went by Chad the Youngin, a local rapper with real talent and minor juvenile priors. Essence was ride or die for him, the kind of loyalty that sounds romantic until it costs everything. Jordan and another young man came out of the store, laughing about something. The humid night air wrapping around them like a blanket. Andre Miles had known Jordan since high school. They were like brothers, both connected to the local hip-hop scene. Andre spotted Essence first. "You need a ride," he called out. Essence looked up, her expression easy, friendly. "No, I'm waiting on my sister to come out of the store." Andre nodded. Jordan waved. They talked for a moment casual. The kind of exchange that happens in parking lots at 2 in the morning when everyone's young and the weekend stretches ahead. Conceived smiled. She answered their questions. But something about her timing was off, like she was working from a script she'd only half memorized. Friendly, but a beat late on every answer. Her eyes kept drifting somewhere over Andre's shoulder, scanning the street beyond. Andre felt it. That small tug of unease. Not alarm, just the quiet sense that something didn't quite line up. But you don't question a friend at 2 in the morning over a feeling. You assume the best. You say goodbye and get in the car. That's what makes these moments so unbearable to look back on. How ordinary they feel at the time. How many chances there are to notice. To ask one more question. To change the trajectory by 30 seconds. The assumptions that hold until they don't. Jordan climbed into the passenger seat. Andre got behind the wheel. The engine turned over, the radio low. They pulled out of the parking lot, leaving Essence standing under the fluorescent lights with her phone in her hand. She wasn't waiting for her sister. The street was quiet. The kind of summer night that feels suspended, thick with heat and possibility. Jordan was thinking about the record, the music, the plans they'd been making. Andre was thinking about getting home. Neither of them was thinking about the next intersection, the red light they were about to stop at, or the fact that Essence Dyson had just watched them leave and picked up her phone. They told her goodbye and pulled out of the lot. The next red light they stopped at was the last one Jordan would ever sit through. Andre's foot was on the brake when the first shot came through the passenger window. The car was stopped at the intersection. The night thick and quiet around them. They'd been talking about nothing important, the kind of conversation that fills the space between leaving one place and arriving at another. The light glowed red above them. The street was mostly empty. A man appeared at the passenger side. Not running, not shouting. Just there. Suddenly. Close enough to touch the glass. Then 3 shots, fast and sharp, breaking the night open. Andre felt the pain in his foot first, a bright, searing shock that made no sense until it did. His foot still pressed against the brake pedal, suddenly on fire. He looked down, trying to understand what had just happened to his body. Why the floor of the car was wrong. Then he turned right. "Jordan!" His voice came out strange, too loud in the ringing silence after the shots. "Jordan!" The passenger seat gave him nothing back. Jordan's head was tilted at an angle that didn't belong to sleep or surprise. The window was gone. Just gone. And the space where it had been let in all the wrong air. Jordan. The silence in the passenger seat was the only answer. There's a moment in every life where a single second splits everything into before and after. The half second where a normal night becomes the rest of your life. Where the friend you were just talking to becomes the friend you lost. Where a red light stops being an inconvenience and becomes the place you'll see in your dreams for decades. Andre was living in that moment now. His foot was bleeding. His best friend wasn't breathing. The man who had walked up to the window was already moving away. Fast now, heading back toward a black sedan idling at the edge of the intersection. Other people were there witnesses. Other drivers stopped at the same light. Their own nights fracturing in real time. Someone screamed. Someone else was reaching for a phone. The chaos of a public shooting was beginning. The sirens still minutes away. The reality settling over everyone at once. The shooter reached the black sedan and jumped in. The car lurched forward, tires finding traction, pulling away from the intersection like it had somewhere to be. But one man at that light, standing there with his own weapon drawn. A security guard who'd just finished his shift had already started doing the one thing that might matter. He was reading the license plate out loud, saying the numbers and letters over and over, drilling them into his memory, making sure that when the police arrived and asked what he'd seen, he'd have something solid to give them. The black sedan sped away into the Baton Rouge night. Jordan was dead in the passenger seat. Andre was bleeding and trying to make sense of what his foot felt like, and what his friend looked like, and how 30 seconds ago, everything had been fine. The shooter jumped into a black sedan and it sped away. But one man at that light had already started reading the license plate out loud. The man reading the license plate was James Logan. He was a security guard just off his shift, sitting at the same intersection in his own car when the shooting happened. He saw the gunman walk up to the passenger window of the car ahead. He saw the muzzle flash, heard the crack of 3 shots splitting the night open. He saw the gunman turn and run back toward a black sedan idling in the shadows. Logan stepped out of his car, weapon drawn. "Drop the gun!" he shouted. The gunman didn't drop it. He jumped into the black sedan. The car was already moving, tires biting pavement, pulling away fast. Logan had a choice in that moment. Chase the emotion or chase the detail? Anger or information? He chose information. The license plate. Nothing else mattered. Not the chaos unfolding around him. Not the screaming. Not the shattered glass glittering under the streetlights. The number. Get the number. Hold the number. Nothing else exists but the number. He locked his eyes on the back of the fleeing sedan and started reading the plate out loud, drilling it into his memory, letters and numbers in sequence, over and over, a mantra against forgetting. The sedan turned a corner and disappeared. Logan kept saying, "The plate." Sirens were already rising in the distance. Someone was on the phone with dispatch. Someone else was trying to help Andre, who was still in the driver's seat with a bullet wound in his foot and his best friend dead beside him. The scene was chaos, but Logan had done the one thing that could turn chaos into a lead. He doesn't think of himself as brave when he does these things. He thinks like a first responder. Narrow the focus. Capture what matters. Hand it to the people who come next. The first patrol car arrived within minutes. An officer stepped out, scanning the scene, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Logan approached him immediately. "You got the plate?" the officer asked. Logan recited it. The officer wrote it down, radioed it in. An APB went out across Baton Rouge. All units, black sedan, License plate number provided by witness at the scene. Find it. Stop it. Bring in everyone inside. It was the kind of moment where good police work begins. A witness who kept his head. A detail preserved in the seconds after violence. A lead that could connect a car to a shooter. A shooter to a name to an arrest. The plate came back fast. It came back registered to a woman, Sienna Washington. The officers looked at each other, then back at the report. Every witness that night had described the fleeing suspects as men. The shooter was a man. The driver was a man. The person in the back seat, if there was one, had been described as a man, but the car belonged to a woman. The plate came back fast. It came back to a woman, and every suspect that night had been a man. While investigators puzzled over a license plate registered to a woman when all the suspects were men, an ordinary morning was breaking open by phone. Jordan's mother had always been the calm one in the family, the steady presence, the one who could absorb chaos and return stillness. When crisis came, she was the person others leaned on. That's who she had always been. Her father called that morning with the news no parent should ever receive. "There's been an incident," he said, his voice already carrying the weight of what came next. "Jordan and Andre were shot last night, and Jordan didn't make it." The words landed but didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Jordan was supposed to be planning community college. He was supposed to be working on his record. He was supposed to be alive. The way children are supposed to outlive their parents. The way mornings are supposed to follow nights without changing everything. This was her turn to be calm. And there was no such thing left. The phone felt heavy in her hand. Her father's voice kept going, offering details she couldn't hold, facts that slipped past her comprehension because the only fact that mattered was already unbearable. Jordan was gone, shot at a red light. Senseless, sudden violence that had taken her boy and left her standing in an ordinary room on an ordinary morning that would never be ordinary again. A lot of crying followed. Not a pleasant moment, the understatement cruelty uses when no words are big enough to hold the grief. The world, she would say later, completely stopped. That's what grief does in the first moments. It doesn't explode. It doesn't race forward. It stops time entirely. Pins you in place. Makes you feel like you're watching yourself from somewhere far away. The woman who had always been calm stood there holding the phone. And calm was a country she couldn't reach anymore. Gina, Jordan's sister, called into the grief that morning. More tears, more impossible news cycling through the family. Each person learning and then having to tell the next, spreading the weight of it until everyone who loved Jordan was carrying the same unbearable knowledge. Jordan's grandmother, who had always remembered him as hilarious and full of joy, now had to remember him as gone, taken, killed over nothing they could yet understand. There's no script for this. No way to practice being the parent whose child doesn't come home. No training for the phone call that splits your life into before and after. While a mother learned her son was gone. The man who killed him was already becoming a legend on the internet, hashtag and all. Social media posts celebrating the shooting. People treating violence like performance. Turning murder into mythology. Run, Chad, run, they were calling it. Like a boy's life was a game someone had just won, while a mother learned her son was gone. The man who killed him was already becoming a legend on the internet, hashtag and all. The man becoming that legend was somewhere in Baton Rouge, and investigators had one piece of solid evidence to find him. The license plate James Logan had memorized. It led them to a dead end. Literally. The abandoned car sat at the end of a narrow road where the pavement simply stopped. Engine still ticking with residual heat. Doors left open. The interior illuminated by patrol car lights. This was where the suspects had bailed. Witnesses had seen 3 men running from the vehicle, scattering into the darkness. Inside, on the back floorboard, investigators found a handgun, jammed. The kind of malfunction that happens under stress. When someone is firing fast and the mechanism catches. The kind of detail that says panic, not planning. But the registration told a different story. The car was registered to Sienna, Washington, a woman. Investigators looked at each other, then back at the paperwork. Every witness at that intersection had described the fleeing suspects as men. The shooter, male. The driver, male. The person in the back seat, if there was one male. So whose car was this? The car is registered to a woman, one detective thought, flipping through his notes. Every witness said the suspects were men. Right pieces, another said, staring at the registration. Wrong picture. The mismatch sent them sideways. Was the car stolen? Borrowed? Was Sienna Washington an accomplice? Or just someone whose vehicle had been taken without her knowledge? A detective turned the registration over in his hands like it was. The wrong puzzle box lid. All the pieces were there, but they didn't form the image they were supposed to. They ran Sienna Washington's information and got an address in Baton Rouge. Not far from where the car had been abandoned. Close enough to walk. If you were running from something. 2 investigators drove to the registered address. A modest house. Lights on inside. The kind of place that looked lived in and ordinary. They approached the door. The weight of the night still hanging on them. Jordan shot at a red light. A family grieving. A jammed gun on a floorboard. And a license plate that pointed to a woman when all the suspects were men. One of them knocked. A man answered the door. Frederick Gaines stood there in the doorway, looking at the investigators with an expression that wasn't quite surprise. He was young, maybe early 20s, and he matched the description exactly one of the men witnesses had seen running from that black sedan at the dead end. Not Sienna Washington. Not the woman whose name was on the registration. A man, standing at the address where the getaway car was registered, looking at 2 detectives who had just connected a vehicle to a murder. At the registered address. A man answered the door, and he matched one of the men seen running from that car. The investigators asked Frederick Gaines to step outside. They had questions. He had a story ready about a carjacking. His girlfriend's car, he explained. Someone had stolen it earlier that night. He'd already reported it. Check the records. The vehicle had been taken from him. And whatever happened after that, whatever those witnesses saw, it had nothing to do with him. The story was smooth. Too smooth, maybe, for something that should have been frantic and confused. But smooth wasn't proof. Matching a description wasn't proof. Being at the registered address of a getaway car wasn't proof. They brought him to the station anyway. The interview room was small and fluorescent lit. The kind of space designed to make people uncomfortable. Frederick sat across from 2 detectives, his posture relaxed, his answers consistent. He didn't know anything about any shooting. The car had been taken from him. End of story. The car was carjacked, he said again. I reported it. The detectives looked at each other. They'd run the report. It existed. Filed hours after the murder. But it existed. A man calling in to say his girlfriend's car had been stolen. The timing was convenient. Almost too convenient. But a filed report was a filed report. You matched the description of one of the men seen running from that vehicle, one detective said. Frederick shrugged. A lot of people probably match that description. He was right. Technically. Young black man, medium build, casual clothes. It described thousands of people in Baton Rouge. The witness accounts were solid on the fact that men had fled the vehicle, but less solid on specifics. Height, weight, age, all approximations made in the chaos after violence. He matches the description, the detective thought. But matching isn't proving. Knowing and proving are two different rooms. And Frederick was standing in the gap, saying nothing they could use. They pressed him, asked about the jammed gun on the floorboard, asked about the route the car took after the shooting, asked if he knew who had really been driving, who had fired those shots into a car at a red light, who had killed an 18-year-old kid over nothing. Frederick gave them calm, consistent denials. He didn't know. He wasn't there. The car had been stolen. That was his story, and he was sticking to it. The detectives knew better. Every instinct they had said this man was involved. But instinct wasn't evidence. Suspicion wasn't a charge. Without physical proof tying him to the shooting, without a witness who could place him definitively at the scene, without forensics from the car that linked him directly to the violence, they had nothing that would hold up in court. They had to let him go. Frederick walked out of that station a free man. Not exonerated, just free. The gap between knowing and proving had swallowed him whole, and there was nothing the investigators could do but watch him leave and hope something else would break. The break didn't come from the car or the man who drove it. It came that afternoon, from a phone call, from a name nobody had said yet. The break didn't come from Frederick. It came from a voice that wouldn't give a name. The call came in just after 3 that afternoon. 2 names, then a dial tone. A detective answered the phone in the bullpen, expecting another routine tip, another dead end. Instead, the voice on the other end was quick and clear, offering just enough to matter. "Chad Chesterfield," the caller said. "Essence Dyson. That's all I can say." Then the line went dead. The detective looked at the phone, then at his partner across the room. "We got 2 names. They ran the names immediately. Database checks, arrest records, known associates. Within minutes, profiles started populating on the screens. Chad Chesterfield." The detective read the information out loud. Chad, 17, minor priors, local rapper. The screen showed a young face, someone who'd been in the system before, but never for anything major. Juvenile offenses. The kind of thing that got filed and forgotten. But here was his name. Called in hours after a murder. Connected to nothing yet but a stranger's voice and a dial tone. Another detective pulled up the second name. Essence Dyson, 19, simple robbery, battery, student. The record was thin, not a hardened criminal. Not someone who'd been cycling through the system for years. A college student with a minor record, barely a blip on law enforcement's radar. But someone had called them in. Someone who knew something about what happened at that red light had picked up a phone and named these 2 people specifically. That meant something. It meant they were close enough to the crime to be worth mentioning. It meant someone was scared, or angry, or guilty enough to drop their names. 2 names and a dial tone. It felt like a break. But a name wasn't a case. A name wasn't evidence. It was just a direction to point, a thread to pull. They cross-referenced the names with the license plate. With Frederick Gaines. With the car registered to Siena, Washington. No obvious connections jumped out. Chad and Essence weren't listed as owners. Weren't connected to Frederick in any system the investigators could access. But that didn't mean they weren't connected. It just meant the connection wasn't official. The detective who'd taken the call stared at the 2 names on the screen. Chad Chesterfield, Essence Dyson. A 17-year-old rapper with minor priors, and a 19-year-old student with a thin record. They didn't look like killers. But neither did most people before you knew what they'd done. Find them, one detective said. Bring them in. They started with addresses. Known associates. Family members. Essence Dyson had a registered address in Baton Rouge. Chad was harder to pin down. A teenager who moved between family and friends, someone who might be anywhere in the city. One of those two names they could find. The other had just become the most protected teenager in Baton Rouge. They found Essence Dyson and brought her to the station. The one they could reach. The one who hadn't started running. She sat in the interview room with what detectives would later describe as a very negative demeanor. Not hostile, exactly. Not aggressive, but closed. Guarded. Every question met with a wall. Every answer calculated to give as little as possible. They asked her about the night Jordan was killed. She had a story.
Jordan and Andre were shot last night, and Jordan didn't make it.
She'd seen Jordan and Andre at the convenience store that night. Just a chance meeting. They'd talked briefly in the parking lot. Casual conversation. Nothing unusual. She'd told them she was waiting for her sister. They'd offered her a ride. She'd declined. They'd left. And that was the last time she saw them. The story was simple. Almost too simple. But simple wasn't proof of lying any more than complex was proof of truth. Detectives pressed her about the shooting, about who had been in that black sedan, about who had walked up to that passenger window and fired 3 shots into a car at a red light. The shooter, she said, her voice flat. It wasn't nobody I knew. It wasn't Chadley. Chadley. She said the name without being asked, defending him before they'd even accused him. That's what loyalty does. It shows itself in the spaces where it doesn't need to be. They asked about her relationship with Chad. She confirmed it, but without detail. They were together. Yes. That was all she'd say. They asked if she'd been with him that night. She said no. They asked if she knew where he'd been. She said she didn't. Every question about that night. She answered. The store. The parking lot. The brief conversation with Jordan and Andre. She gave them those details. Enough to sound cooperative without saying anything that mattered. But the question that mattered, where is Chad now, was the one she went silent on. Do you know where he is? One detective asked. Essence looked at him across the table. If I did know, she said slowly, I wouldn't tell you. There it was. Not a denial. Not a lie. Just a declaration of where her loyalty lay. She would protect Chad before she'd help them find him. Even if that meant obstructing a murder investigation. Even if that meant sitting in an interview room, knowing they suspected her of involvement. They tried different angles. Asked about Frederick Gaines. About the car registered to Siena, Washington. About the license plate James Logan had memorized. Essence gave them nothing. Her face stayed neutral. Her answers stayed short. I don't have anything else to say without a lawyer present, she finally said. Can I just go home? They couldn't hold her. She hadn't been charged with anything. Suspicion wasn't an arrestable offense. Refusing to cooperate wasn't a crime. Not yet. Without evidence tying her directly to the shooting, without a witness placing her in that car, without forensics proving she'd been there, they had to let her walk. She stood up, collected her things, and left the station. Free. Uncooperative, but free. And somewhere across the parish, an entire movement was making sure her boyfriend never came in at all. The movement protecting Chad was no secret. It was everywhere. It started as a hashtag. Run. Chad, run. And within days, it was a movement. Social media posts flooding timelines. People celebrating the fact that he was still free. Friends, acquaintances, strangers who'd never met Jordan, all posting the same message. Keep running. Don't let them catch you. We're with you. The hashtag was everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, local forums. Run, Chad, run. Like it was a game. Like a 19-year-old boy wasn't dead. Like Jordan's mother wasn't waking up every morning to a world where her son's killer was being treated like a folk hero. Chad was hiding. And he had help. Supporters moving him from house to house, keeping him ahead of investigators, feeding him information about where the police were looking. An organized effort to obstruct justice, happening in plain sight under a hashtag. Detectives followed every lead, every tip, every rumor, every possible location. 3 months of searching. State police joined the effort. Then the U.S. Marshals. The manhunt expanded. Resources pouring in. But Chad stayed one step ahead because people kept helping him run. Jordan's family waited. Every day that passed without an arrest was another day the system failed them. The waiting, the stalling, the city cheering for the runner while they buried their son. Exhaustion layered over grief, layered over rage. The horror isn't the hiding. It's how many hands helped people who'd never met Jordan, who knew nothing about his talent, or his laughter, or his plans for college. Turning a killing into a hashtag. Treating murder like entertainment. Treating a manhunt like a spectator sport where they could pick sides and root for the villain. 3 months. Every tip a dead end. Every house empty by the time investigators arrived. Every person claiming they didn't know where he was. Even as the hashtag kept trending. But movements falter. People get tired. Someone always talks. Someone always makes a mistake. It took 3 months and a federal manhunt. State police, local detectives, U.S. Marshals all working the same case, following the same ghost. And finally, a tip that held. A location that didn't go cold. They found him 10 miles away, in Baker. Not across state lines. Not in another city. 10 miles from where Jordan died. He'd been hiding in plain sight, passing through homes in the surrounding area, protected by people who thought they were helping a friend instead of obstructing a murder investigation. When the authorities moved in, Chad didn't run. The hashtag had made him a legend online for 3 months, but sitting in the back of a patrol car, headed to an interview room, he was just 17. Just a boy who'd killed someone and thought he could hide forever because the internet told him he could. It took 3 months and a federal manhunt. They found him 10 miles away, in Baker. In a house in Baker, 10 miles outside Baton Rouge, they found Chadley Chesterfield and brought him in. He sat in the interview room smaller than he'd been online. The hashtag had made him larger than life for 3 months. A legend. A runner. Someone who'd beaten the system. But under fluorescent lights, he was just 17. Just a boy in a plastic chair facing detectives who'd spent the summer hunting him. They started with the basics. Name, age, where he'd been hiding. Chad answered the easy questions, his voice calm. He looked like someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "Were you at that intersection the night Jordan Key was killed?" a detective asked. "No," Chad said without hesitation. "I wasn't there." "Then where were you?" "Home. I wasn't anywhere near that." The denials came fast and smooth. He hadn't been at the scene. He didn't know anything about a shooting. The car. Not his. The gun. Never seen it. Every question met with a wall of no. Detectives laid out what they had. The license plate traced to a car connected to him. The anonymous tip naming him specifically. The 3-month manhunt that ended with him hiding in Baker instead of turning himself in. If you weren't involved, one detective said, why did you run? Chad shrugged. I didn't run. I was just staying with friends. For 3 months, while we were looking for you. That wasn't me. That was other people. He's 17, and he's been a legend online for a season. He answers like a boy who thinks a story can still outrun a plate number. But stories only work when evidence is thin, and the evidence wasn't thin anymore. They had the car, the gun, the license plate, the anonymous tip. They had Frederick Gaines, who'd already lied about a carjacking. They had Essence Dyson, who'd refused to cooperate but whose refusal said as much as a confession. They pressed Chad, asked about his relationship with Essence, about his beef with Jordan over rap music, about why someone would call in his name hours after a murder if he had nothing to do with it. He gave them nothing, just denials, flat and consistent. You were there, a detective said, leaning forward. We know you were there. The car, the gun, the witnesses, it all points to you. Then prove it, Chad said, and there it was. The calculation behind the calm. He knew they had pieces. He knew the pieces pointed to him. But pieces weren't the same as proof. Suspicion wasn't a conviction. As long as he kept saying no, they had to build the case without his help. They tried for hours. Different angles, different questions, different tones. Chad didn't budge. He'd spent 3 months learning how to disappear. Now he was learning how to stay silent. Chad wouldn't break. So the detectives went back to the one man who'd already felt the walls move. The man who drove. Frederick Gaines came back. The man who drove sat in that chair a second time. The second time he sat there, he could feel the walls move. The room was the same. The detectives were the same. But everything else had shifted. Last time, Frederick had walked out free with a story about a carjacking. This time, the detectives had Chad in custody. They had Essence's name on record. They had forensics from the car, ballistics from the gun, and 3 months of evidence that pointed to a coordinated effort to kill Jordan Key at that red light. Chad's in custody, a detective said, leaning back in his chair. Essence has been named. The car evidence is solid. Where does that leave you? Frederick didn't answer right away. He looked at the table, at the walls, at the detectives watching him calculate his next move. The walls were closing. Not metaphorically, actually closing. The space he'd had to maneuver 3 months ago, the gap between knowing and proving, between suspicion and evidence, that space was gone now. Chad was arrested. Essence was named. The forensics tied the car to the crime, and Frederick was the man who'd been at the registered address when they came looking. The man whose girlfriend's car had been used. The man who'd filed a carjacking report hours after a murder. We know you were involved, the detective continued. The question is, how involved? The question is whether you're the guy who drove or the guy who pulled the trigger. Frederick knew he hadn't pulled the trigger. But being the driver wasn't much better when someone was dead. When an 18-year-old boy had been shot in the head at a red light. When a family was waiting for justice and someone had to answer for it. He does the arithmetic everyone in his seat eventually does. What he loses by talking versus by staying the man who drove. What cooperating costs him versus what staying silent might. The math is cruel but clear. The numbers don't lie. Chad's arrested. Essence won't talk. Someone has to explain how it happened. And if Frederick doesn't, they'll build the story without him, and he might end up holding more weight than he actually carried. Before we hear what Frederick is about to reveal, are you still with us? Comment A if you think he'll give up everything, or B if you think he'll still protect someone, and tell us why in one short reason. Please note, what follows includes recreated details for storytelling purposes, though the core facts remain documented. Frederick looked up at the detectives. He'd been sitting with this weight for 3 months. 3 months of watching Chad become a hashtag. 3 months of knowing what really happened while everyone else speculated. 3 months of carrying the truth alone while a family waited for answers. He took a breath. "I'm going to break it down right now," he said. The detectives leaned forward. And then he did. Frederick leaned forward and started talking. Chad was on the phone the whole ride, he said. And the phone was on speaker. The detectives listened as Frederick reconstructed June 30th. He'd picked Chad up from a club that night. Chad had asked for a ride, and Frederick said yes. They got in the car registered to Frederick's girlfriend. The car that would end up abandoned at a dead end, and started driving. Chad was on his phone. Not texting, talking. To Essence. And the call was on speaker, so Frederick heard everything. Essence had been following Jordan and Andre. She'd spotted them at the convenience store and called Chad immediately, not to warn them away, to tell Chad where they were, to give him a target. She'd been following them, Frederick said. She was giving Chad a play-by-play the whole time. The voice coming through that speaker wasn't worried or scared. It was operational. Narrating movements in real time. Tracking Jordan's car through Baton Rouge like a spotter calling coordinates. "I see them. They're over here." That's what Essence said, according to Frederick. Not a warning, not a heads up, a location report. She stayed behind Jordan's car as it moved through the streets. She told Chad which direction they were heading. She described the intersections, the turns, the route. She guided them to that red light. The detectives hear it, and something clicks, the investigation catching up to what should have been obvious from the start. The chance meeting Essence had described in her interview, the story about waiting for her sister, the casual conversation in the parking lot. It wasn't chance at all. It was coordination. A hunt with a spotter narrating every move down a speakerphone. Frederick kept talking. He described pulling up near the intersection, Chad getting out of the car, walking toward Jordan's vehicle as it sat at the red light. 2 young men who had no idea what was coming. 3 shots through the passenger window. Jordan hit in the head. Andre hit in the foot. The window gone. The night shattered. The red light still glowing above them. Chad ran back to the car and jumped in. Frederick drove. They ditched the vehicle at the dead end and scattered. The gun jammed from firing too fast, left on the back floorboard. The evidence everywhere, waiting to be found. And Essence. The girl who'd stood in that parking lot and told Jordan and Andre she was waiting for her sister had been on the phone the entire time. Watching. Reporting. Making sure Chad knew exactly where to find them. The detectives sat back. They'd suspected coordination. They'd known multiple people were involved. But this was more than involvement. This was orchestration. Essence hadn't just known about the murder, she'd made it possible. Now they knew what she'd done. What they needed next was proof that couldn't lawyer up, and it was sitting in the abandoned car. While the abandoned car waited to be processed, investigators dug into the why. The feuding rap scene in Baton Rouge revealed itself in layers. Social media posts, diss tracks, territorial claims, YouTube videos of local battles. comment sections turning into threat exchanges. The underground music scene looked like noise from the outside, kids posturing, talking tough, building reputations through insults. But inside it, the stakes were real. Chad had a crew. Kane Music Mafia, they called themselves. Local rappers with talent and ambition, trying to make names in a city where everyone was fighting for the same small spotlight. Jordan had his own group, his own music, his own plans. The beef started over rap songs. Music that Jordan's crew claimed Chad had taken from them. Stolen lyrics, stolen beats, stolen credit. In the rap world, that's not just theft. It's disrespect. It's someone taking your voice and claiming it as theirs. The dispute played out online first. Diss tracks posted to YouTube. Comments fired back and forth. Insults that started as artistic rivalry and turned personal. Threats that seemed like performance until they weren't. What started as a grievance over music became a challenge to respect. And respect, in that world, wasn't abstract. It was currency. It was safety. It was the difference between being taken seriously and being seen as weak. The beef escalated. Online insults became real threats. The distance between keyboard and street narrowed. Words turned into plans. And on June 30th, at a red light on South Foster Drive, the plan became action. Investigators had initially filed these feuds as noise kids posturing online. All bark. They'd missed how real the stakes were until it was too late. Now they understood. Jordan hadn't been killed in a random act of violence. He'd been targeted, tracked, hunted down over a dispute that had started with stolen music and escalated until someone decided the only way to settle it was with bullets. Jordan died over rap lyrics. A college student with plans for a degree, shot in the head at a red light because of a beef over music. The motive was this small, this petty, this senseless. That's what made it so hard to hold. The disproportion of it. The gap between cause and consequence. Music taken, so a life taken. Respect challenged, so a boy killed. The arithmetic didn't balance. It never would. But senseless didn't mean unprovable. The motive explained the coordination. It explained why Essence had been willing to track Jordan through the city, narrating his movements like a military operation. It explained why Chad had been on that phone, waiting for the location, ready to act. It explained the 3 months of hiding, the hashtag, the refusal to cooperate. The motive was small, which meant the proof would have to be overwhelming. Confessions could be recanted. Witnesses could be discredited. But physical evidence, DNA, ballistics, forensics that tied people to the car and the gun and the crime that couldn't be explained away. And inside that abandoned car, it was waiting. The proof Frederick promised was sitting in an evidence bay in Baton Rouge. The sedan sat under fluorescent lights, every surface waiting to be swabbed. The black car that had carried 3 people to a murder. The car registered to Siena, Washington, driven by Frederick Gaines. Abandoned at a dead end with a jammed gun on the back floorboard. Crime lab technicians moved through it methodically. Door handles first, exterior and interior. Then the steering wheel. The dashboard. The seats. The back floorboard where the weapon had been left behind. Everything catalogued. Everything photographed. Cotton swabs collecting microscopic traces of whoever had touched this vehicle. The gun went to ballistics. The jammed handgun that had fired 3 shots through a passenger window at a red light. Technicians test-fired it, compared the markings on the bullets to the shell casings recovered from South Foster Drive. The striations. The unique patterns left by the barrel. the microscopic signature every gun leaves on every round it fires. Results came back over days and weeks. The kind of patient, methodical work that builds cases brick by brick. Ballistics' first match. The recovered weapon had fired the shell casings from the scene. The gun left in that car was the gun that killed Jordan Key. Then, DNA. The swabs from the door handles. The steering wheel. The interior surfaces. The samples sent to the lab. Processed. Run through databases. Hits came back one by one. Chadley Chesterfield. His DNA on the exterior door handle. On the interior. On the steering wheel. Throughout the car. And on the murder weapon itself. Chad had been in that vehicle. He'd touched the gun. The physical evidence placed him there, just like Frederick said. Frederick's words had been story. Now the lab had made them fact. That's the difference forensics makes. A confession can be recanted. A witness can change their mind or be discredited on the stand. But DNA doesn't lie. Ballistics don't change their story. Physical evidence just is present or absent, matching or not, indifferent to who it implicates. Frederick's account, Chad on speakerphone, essence spotting, Frederick driving. The coordinated hunt ending at that red light was no longer just words. The lab had corroborated it. Physical evidence had placed Chad in that car with his hands on that gun. But prosecutors building a murder case needed more than forensics. Juries wanted the full picture. They wanted to understand not just that someone had been there, but what they'd done, what they'd intended, why. They needed to hear it from the boy who'd pulled the trigger. Chad had been arrested. He'd been interrogated once, given them nothing but denials. But that was before the forensics came back, before his DNA showed up on every surface, before ballistics tied the gun to the murder and his fingerprints tied him to the gun. Now the evidence wasn't just circumstantial, it was overwhelming. And overwhelming evidence has a way of changing calculations. The car had told investigators who fired the shots that killed Jordan Key. Physical evidence had built the scaffold. Now they needed the confession from Chadley Chesterfield himself. They brought Chad back into the interview room with the forensics in hand. Chadley Chesterfield sat across from detectives. DNA results on the table between them. Physical evidence in black and white. His fingerprints, his DNA, his connection to the murder weapon that had killed Jordan Key. He started with a flat denial. "I wasn't there," Chad said, his voice steady. A detective slid the forensics report across the table. "Your DNA is on the gun, Chad. On the door handles. Throughout the car. You were there." Chad looked at the papers without touching them. "Must have been someone who looked like me." The silence in that room stretched. Cold fluorescent lights overhead. The plastic chair uncomfortable by design. The evidence photos spread across the table, showing every surface they'd swabbed. Every place his DNA had been found. "We have ballistics," another detective said. "The gun in that car fired the shots that killed Jordan. Your prints are on it." Chad shifted in his seat. The denials that had worked before, when they had suspicion but no proof, weren't working now. The forensics didn't care what story he told. They just were. The lies began to shift under pressure. "Might have been a friend drove my car," he said. "So you sent someone?" a detective asked. Chad hesitated. "I don't remember exactly." Each version weaker than the last. "Wasn't there" became maybe a friend. Maybe a friend became maybe he sent someone. The story collapsing in stages. Crumbling under the weight of evidence that couldn't be explained away. The detectives pressed. They had Frederick's confession. They had the forensics. They had witnesses. They had the abandoned car. The jammed gun. 3 months of Chad running instead of turning himself in to clear his name. We know what happened, one detective said. Frederick told us. Essence Dyson's name came up in the investigation. We know she was tracking Jordan. We know you were on that phone. We know you got out of that car at the red light and fired 3 shots. Chad looked up at the mention of Essence's name.
Basically, if I did know, I wouldn't tell you.
Chad shrugged. We ain't close like that. She was tracking Jordan for you. She was on the phone with you the whole time. She was just around, Chad said, his tone dismissive. Just someone in the background. Not important. Not close. He threw her devotion back without knowing what she'd already done to protect him. Without understanding that while he sat here minimizing her role, she'd been refusing to cooperate with investigators. That she'd turned down deals. That she'd chosen loyalty to him over her own freedom. That's what makes betrayal cut deepest when it's not intentional. When someone dismisses a sacrifice they never even knew was being made. Chadley Chesterfield said they weren't close. That Essence didn't mean much. But in another interview room across Baton Rouge, she was about to prove him wrong by choosing a life sentence over speaking his name. In another interview room, Essence Dyson sat across from a prosecutor with a different kind of evidence on the table. The prosecutor slid the plea deal across to her, a single sheet of paper that represented a choice, a way out. Testify against Chad, and we can work something out, the prosecutor said. Reduce charges, maybe 5 years instead of life. Essence looked at the paper, but didn't touch it. You're looking at life. Essence. This is your chance. She was 19. She'd been studying math at LSU before all this happened. She was capable of calculating exactly what the numbers meant. 5 years versus 30. 5 years versus life. The arithmetic was straightforward. You understand what we're offering? The prosecutor asked. Essence nodded. She understood. She could run the numbers as well as anyone, better than most. That wasn't the problem. To everyone's surprise, she said no. I don't have anything to say, Essence said. Her voice, quiet but firm. The prosecutor stared at her. You were there. You tracked Jordan. You were on the phone with Chad the whole time. You know what happened. It would feel like betraying him, Essence said. He's facing murder charges. You're facing the same thing. This is your chance to... I can't do that, Essence interrupted. The silence that followed stretched long. The plea deal sat on the table between them. Unsigned. Untouched. A lifeline she wouldn't reach for. A math major choosing the wrong answer on purpose. That's what loyalty does when it calculates a different kind of math. When the cost isn't measured in years, but in something harder to quantify. When devotion overrides self-preservation. Essence Dyson could run numbers. She knew exactly what this refusal cost. 30 years of her life, minimum. Possibly more. The DA would prosecute her as an accomplice to murder. The forensics. Frederick's confession. Chad's shifting story. It all pointed to a coordinated effort. And she'd been part of it. But she'd also heard what Chad said about her in his interrogation. The detectives had told her. We ain't close like that. She was just around. He'd dismissed her like she didn't matter. Like the loyalty she was showing him right now, the loyalty that was about to cost her everything, meant nothing. She chose him anyway. That's the tragedy of devotion. It doesn't require reciprocation. It doesn't check first to see if it's valued. It just is absolute and unquestioning, even when the arithmetic makes no sense. 30 years of her life for a boy who'd told detectives they weren't close. She knew it. The prosecutor knew it. Everyone in that room knew it. But knowing and changing course are different calculations. Essence Dyson had made her choice. 30 years of her life for loyalty to a boy who said she didn't matter. November 2015. A Baton Rouge courtroom would weigh what that devotion was worth. November 2015. East Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse. The benches filled. Families on opposite sides. Jordan Key's mother sat in the front row on the left. Essence Dyson's family filled the right side. Between them, a center aisle that might as well have been a canyon. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, and everyone stood as the judge entered. The trial of Essence Dyson and Chadley Chesterfield for the second-degree murder of Jordan Key was about to begin. 2 years had passed since that red light on Airline Highway. 2 years since James Logan memorized a license plate in the dark. 2 years since Frederick Gaines broke down in an interrogation room and told detectives the truth that Essence had been on. Speakerphone with Chad the entire ride, narrating Jordan's location like a spotter calling coordinates. Now it would all be laid out for 12 citizens who'd never heard of Kane Music Mafia or rap beef or hashtag movements. The prosecution's case was methodical. Frederick Gaines took the stand and told his story again. How Chad had been on speaker, how Essence had been following Jordan, how it had all been coordinated. Ballistics experts testified about the murder weapon. DNA analysts explained the evidence found in the abandoned car. Detective after detective walked the jury through the investigation. Essence and Chad sat at the defense table, sometimes together, sometimes separated by their attorneys. They passed notes during testimony. Small folded squares of paper sliding across the table when they thought no one was watching. They giggled during breaks. The judge had to warn them twice. "The jury is present," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Your behavior is being observed." A 19-year-old math student who'd thrown away her future, and a 17-year-old rapper who'd killed over stolen lyrics, and they were passing notes like school children. Jordan's mother watched them. Watched Essence smile at something Chad whispered. Watched them act like this was an inconvenience, a misunderstanding, anything but a murder trial. She thought about Jordan's voice, how he'd been planning to study music production at Southern University, how he'd talked about wanting to help younger kids in the neighborhood, how he'd never gotten the chance. The prosecution played the 911 call from the night of the shooting. Andre's voice. Panicked. "My friend's been shot." He's not responding. Essence looked down at her hands. Chad adjusted his collar. Neither cried. The defense tried to poke holes in Frederick's testimony. He'd made a deal, they said. He had reason to lie. They questioned the DNA evidence timeline. They suggested the rap beef theory was speculation. But they couldn't explain away the forensics. They couldn't explain why Essence had refused to cooperate from the beginning. They couldn't explain the Run Chad Run hashtag or the 3 months in hiding, mostly. They couldn't explain why their clients showed no remorse. The jury had been watching Essence and Chad pass notes.
Show no remorse for taking Jordan Key's life.
When they came back with verdicts, they'd watched enough. The jury filed back into the courtroom. 12 citizens who'd spent days watching Essence Dyson and Chadley Chesterfield pass notes during testimony about murder, who'd heard Frederick Gaines describe the coordinated killing, who'd seen the DNA evidence, the ballistics match, the phone records. They'd watched enough. The foreman stood. The courtroom went still, that specific silence when everyone already knows the answer but needs to hear it spoken. "We find the defendant, Essence Dyson, guilty. Second-degree murder." Jordan Key's mother closed her eyes. "We find the defendant, Chadley Chesterfield, guilty. Second-degree murder." Both convicted, both facing life. The question now was what kind of life and for how long. The judge called the court back to order for sentencing. This was the moment families had been waiting 2 years to hear. Essence stood first. The courtroom held its breath. Life without the possibility of parole. No door. No petition. No hearing in 30 years, or 40, or 50. The 19-year-old math student who'd narrated Jordan's location from the car behind him, who'd refused every deal, who'd chosen loyalty over freedom, she would die in prison. Essence didn't react, didn't cry, didn't look at her family. Then Chad.
I see them, they're over here.
The 17-year-old rapper who'd fired 3 shots through a car window over stolen lyrics, who'd hidden for 3 months while hashtags cheered his name, who'd dismissed Essence in interrogation as someone just around. Life. Eligible for parole after 30 years. A door. Small. Distant. But open. He was 17 when he pulled the trigger. Louisiana law gave him what it called a meaningful opportunity for release. In 2045, if he behaved. If the board agreed, he could walk out. Essence was 19, 2 years older. Never touched the gun, never fired a shot. The accomplice would serve more time than the shooter. Jordan's mother sat in the front row and did the math. 30 years from now, she'd be in her 70s. If Chad walked out in 2045, he'd be 47. Still a life ahead of him. Jordan would still be 18. Justice had arrived. But it came crooked. The girl who spotted and pointed, who turned a ride-along into a coordinated hunt, lost everything. The boy who fired the shots that ended Jordan Key's life kept a sliver of hope. Both families had lost children that night at the red light. But only one walked out of the courthouse knowing their child might come home someday. The judge's gavel fell. The bailiffs led Essence and Chad away in separate directions. Hers to Angola, his to a facility for juvenile offenders aging into the system. The courtroom began to empty. Jordan's mother stood slowly. Her father steadied her arm. They'd come for justice, and they'd gotten verdicts. 2 people convicted. 2 lives taken in exchange for 1. It didn't feel like enough. It never would. Essence's family filed out through a different door. 30 years and forever. 2 sentences that should have meant the same thing, but didn't. The system had spoken. The shooter would get a chance. The spotter wouldn't. Jordan Key was still gone. That was the only number that mattered. In the quiet after the verdicts, some numbers refused to change. Jordan Key was still 18, still planning to study music production at Southern University, still working on the record that would never get released. His mother and grandmother carried those futures with them, all the versions of Jordan that would never exist. The music he'd been making, the younger kids he'd wanted to help, the voice that had cut through warm Baton Rouge afternoons like it belonged somewhere bigger. It belonged somewhere bigger. But it never got the chance. He died at a red light over rap lyrics, over stolen music, over a beef that both families had tried to dismiss as just boys talking. Just words had put 3 bullets through a car window. Jordan's grandmother still heard his voice sometimes. Not in recordings he hadn't finished the album, just in memory. The way he'd laugh working on a verse. The way he'd talk about Southern, about production, about all the time he thought he had. All that potential, extinguished in seconds because someone wanted him gone. Essence Dyson had been 19. A math student who could calculate the cost of every choice, and she'd chosen anyway. She sat in that car behind Jordan's, narrating his location to Chad on speakerphone, pointing the way. When detectives offered her a deal, 5 years instead of life, just testify, she refused. It would feel like betraying him. Ride or die. That's what the phrase meant. Total loyalty. No matter the price. She never confessed. Never cooperated. never gave up Chadley Chesterfield's name, even after he dismissed her as someone who was just around. The math was simple. She gave away her future for someone who didn't value hers. A 19-year-old with a degree within reach, a whole life ahead. She chose loyalty. She got life without parole. Angola became her address. And the only math that mattered now was counting decades she'd never get back. Two teenagers, both with futures, one taken, one given away. The same word sits over both: loyalty. Jordan was loyal to his crew, defended his music, stood his ground. It got him killed at 18. Essence was loyal to Chad, refused every deal, protected him to the end. It got her life without the possibility of parole. The court gave the girl who only pointed the way a heavier price than the man who pulled the trigger. Chad would be eligible for parole after 30 years. Essence would die in prison. She'd been ready to ride or die. The system made her do both. Jordan Key's voice had cut through warm Baton Rouge afternoons like it belonged somewhere bigger. The record he was working on sits unfinished, another casualty of a feud over stolen lyrics that should never have cost anyone their life. But it did. And in the end, loyalty was the weapon that took them both. Jordan Key was 18. Essence Dyson was 19. Both had futures stretching out for decades. Instead, loyalty became the weapon that destroyed them both. This case leaves more questions than answers. What drives someone to throw away their entire life for loyalty to a person who doesn't value that sacrifice? How does a feud over music escalate to murder at a red light? And why does the system sometimes punish the accomplice more severely than the shooter? Jordan's family lost him over something that should never have cost a life. His voice, his music, his dreams, all gone in seconds. His mother and grandmother carry those lost futures every day. Essence chose loyalty. She refused every deal, every chance at freedom. She protected someone who dismissed her as just being around. Now she'll spend life in prison while the shooter can seek parole after 30 years. The irony is unbearable. This story reminds us that loyalty without wisdom can be as destructive as betrayal. That defending pride over music or reputation is never worth a human life. And that choices made in moments of misplaced devotion echo for lifetimes.
I just seen somebody walk up and start shooting.
Leave a comment. What do you think about the sentencing disparity? Should the spotter have received more time than the shooter?
I think it's unfortunate that she had this level of loyalty for him because it ended up costing her her freedom.
Perspective matters. Thank you for listening. This case is based on real events, though some scenes are dramatized for storytelling. The facts remain true, and deepest respect goes to Jordan Key's family and all those affected by this tragedy.